If you've always been a person who believes you work backwards from customers first, that's never going to change. What's different is how interconnected selling activities are today, how fast things move, how many people are involved, and how those situations make the old strategies not suitable for 2021 and beyond.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to Growth Hacks, a podcast from TCV where we discuss strategies and secrets to unlocking high growth with CMOs, CROs, and growth-minded leaders. I'm Kunal Mehta, and I'm a principal at TCV focused on go-to-market strategy.
And I'm Katja Gagan, principal at TCV and head of marketing. Join us as we bring you the growth and marketing playbooks from technology's best and brightest, and chat with operators as they are in the process of innovating. This is Growth Hacks.
It's my pleasure to introduce Scott Santucci to Growth Hacks. Scott's going to be presenting a bunch of growth hacks today. I met Scott when he was a research director at Forrester, where he founded the enablement practice, led research around executive buying, and built frameworks to give people a common language to talk about sales enablement and sales productivity. After Forrester, he moved into more commercial roles, helping companies transform not only their sales process, but simplify their go-to-market. How awesome it is to have Scott Santucci in our metaverse. Welcome to Growth Hacks.
Thank you so much for having me, Kunal, and I just want to plug Growth Hacks. Having been in the research business for so long, the way that you guys are tackling these issues and being reflective and asking questions about what's really happening, not what should be happening, it's just really fantastic. So thank you for having me as a participant on your show, and I'm definitely a listener.
That's awesome. We're glad to hear that. And where does this podcast find you today, Scott?
I'm in Leesburg, Virginia, suburb of Washington, D.C.
And Scott, you've done a lot of research around sales enablement, and our listeners are excited to hear about this. So tell us in a few words, what is sales enablement and how has it evolved? And why does it still pique your interest today?
To be simple about it, Katja, what is sales enablement? If you ask 10 people, you'll get 15 different answers. So let me give you sort of two schools of thought. One school of thought would be sales enablement is about doing something for salespeople to help drive more revenue or more sales. That could be in the form of training. It could be in the form of leads. It could be in the form of content, those kinds of activities. Another school of thought is that sales enablement is about creating the overall system, including customers, figuring out sales and marketing and product and making sure that environment is thriving better. The reason I'm so interested in that bucket and what makes me so compelled is that the world that we live in today is so interconnected that we have to have different strategies on how we optimize sales and marketing. And to me, they're directly related of looking at the ecosystem or the buying networks that we're connected with our customers with. So those are the things that I concentrate on. And that's where my research has always been, is that sales and marketing exists in order to drive growth. And we drive growth by making sure we're always understanding what our customers are looking for, what kinds of problems they have, and also what stands in the way from them getting the value from our products and services.
Scott, you've been an analyst, a practitioner, a consultant. You've talked to thousands of people. You're kind of at the center of enablement. And while a lot's changed, a lot hasn't changed. And I just really love to get your meta view on the state of enablement today.
Well, I think the state of enablement today is the state of a lot of businesses. This is a adopt or die kind of situation. And I hate to be so bold, but let me give you a headline of what I mean by that. If you are following the practices of before either 2008 or definitely before 2019, you're probably arming or gumming up your commercial system. And what I mean by that is that you're probably producing lots of activities that are overly complex, like a training class or a marketing piece, rather than recognizing how much information salespeople have to synthesize and make it digestible for lots of people inside their customer network. So what I would say is the same is if you've always been a person who believes you work backwards from customers first, That's never going to change. What's different is how interconnected selling activities are today, how fast things move, how many people are involved, and how those situations make the old strategies not suitable for 2021 and beyond.
That's interesting, Scott. And since you've been in the enablement business for quite some time, what's an example of things working and where can companies miss the mark?
So what works? What works is creating things that actually take stuff away. So here's a perfect example of a really great enablement program. Going in and identifying all of the obstacles that stand in the way, say, to produce a price quote, and just systematically eliminating them and replacing it with something simpler. You would think that doing something like that is no big a deal, but taking stuff away is not in most people's muscle memory. So to systematically reduce things that stand in the way of making progress is great success. Another example of something that's great success is getting people in the room that have different backgrounds to collaborate on a shared vision. It might be a picture, a map, a diagram of what the future could look like for customers. Because having multiple perspectives involved and the discipline to get it on one sheet of paper means that picture is going to probably be more accessible to more people in those customers. Those are two examples of things that work. I put them in the bucket of synthesis. Things that don't work are more detailed training, plotting the sales force out, doing another heavy training activity to teach them more and more sales technique. Those things don't work.
Got it. Well, Scott, I want to start with something we're both really passionate about, which is the sales and marketing efficiency ratio, or something you refer to as the commercial ratio, and how you're using it to measure the health of sales and marketing. And Scott, maybe before we get rolling into it, you could just explain what it is.
So the commercial ratio is a measure of the overall health of a commercial system. So that includes the revenue coming from customers. It includes the spending that's done for sales and the spending that's done for marketing. And the calculation is pretty straightforward. We got that from you guys. It's the revenue growth divided by total sales and marketing spend, and that gives you a ratio. And what that ratio does is give you a relative health of how efficient the sales and marketing investments are. Now that's the calculation. What is it measuring? It assumes that the money spent for sales and marketing, its purpose is to drive revenue growth. Now, there are situations where you would spend sales and marketing money to retain customers, but that's what its focal point is.
What was your aha moment when you first learned about it?
Having been a consultant for so long, one of the things that's always challenging is how much data companies track about sales and marketing. One large client, they track over 5,000 different metrics for their sales organization. If you're tracking that amount of data, you're tracking nothing. What I'm a big believer in is what's the one metric that we can work backwards from that we want to move the needle from. So when we arrived at commercial ratio from talking to other people inside your company to have that one metric, the metric says to me, how do we as a company work better together? How do we team up and be on the same page to go find more efficient ways to attract customers? So where it became an aha moment to me is how do we stop the internal bickering and let's circle the wagons and go outside and compete in the market, not compete inside our companies.
That's really interesting, Scott. And how do you use that ratio to bring people together or align them around a common goal?
That's been interesting. So I think step number one is let's help everybody get on the same page behind it. Some people will reject it because it's not a ratio that they're familiar with, or it sounds like something that's coming from finance. So I think step number one is let's understand what the meaning of it is. Then step number two is to recognize that there's a sequence of events to get there and that we can get there together by having a plan of stopping to doing things that don't work and finding ways to invest in things that do work. So having that narrative helps a lot. I think what's important, though, is making sure you meet all of the different folks that would be involved in teaming together, you got to meet them where they are first and then help them connect the dots second.
Scott, maybe you could just give us a practical example of how you've rolled this out at one of your customers now.
So for a practical example, let's take a business with about $500 million in revenue in the security space, a SaaS company in the security space. Using the commercial ratio as a way to say, if we want to improve the overall health of sales or profitability, let's look at how we're doing today. And using that ratio to say, well, what would it be if we went from 0.55 to 0.60 to 0.75 to 1.0? And why don't we ask those questions of what would it look like? And let's simulate what that would look like in terms of our financial performance, what it would look like in terms of our organizations. Help people envision what that would look like. In doing that process, what's interesting that happens is people move off of the thing that they have to do right now in that moment, and then they can start envisioning making incremental change. Then from there, what happened is, wow, so we could be doing things differently. Where should we start, or what should that look like? So then the next question is, well, let's look at your business like a portfolio of different revenue streams, and let's segment it out differently and look at these different buckets in their own isolation. What we're looking to do is optimize or create the most value out of each of these revenue streams. And what we want to do is just take out as much friction as possible so that we make it much easier to do work and make sure that people agree with that. Then the next part is, well, let's pick one of those things and work on something to tackle.
Right. And in the end, it's all about value creation, right?
That's right. Yes, exactly.
And in that vein, you talk about the route to value and how you combine what sales and marketing do to deliver that value. Give me an example.
So that's a great question. So let's pick that same example that we were working backwards from. So one of the things that we highlighted, so now that we have these different portfolios of revenue streams and we have a good understanding about where their friction is, the idea of a route to value is a different way to think about sales messaging and sales training. A basic metaphor is to say, let's recognize that we're in the value creation business, to your point. And what we want to do is we want to help our clients along a journey from where they are today, the bad state, to where they want to get to, a envisioned future state that our company can take them from. So what we need to do is figure out what that journey looks like. We call that a value map. That's where they want to get to. Now what the route to value is to say, let's figure out what the change agent and the executive sponsor need to do to buy into that picture and then help guide them through the decisions, the predictable decisions that they're going to need to make through that journey. It's kind of like plotting out a movie, if you will, that there are predictable scenes that you can work backwards from. Then once you have that, you can determine, do we want our salespeople to be security subject matter experts, or do we want them to be decision-making brokers, decision-making champions? And if you make them decision-making champions, things become a lot easier. You give them less materials. You can define very specific scenes. And then for marketing, it's let's capture stories that match to each one of those scenes that you already have and organize that information to help salespeople. So a route to value, really, to be simple about it, is just writing a movie, a future movie of where you want to take your customers. You're casting your clients as the heroes. Therefore, you're also casting your salespeople as the guides. And then marketing are there to equip the salespeople with the tools that they need to help the clients to navigate all of those different variables that they're going to run into inside their organizations.
I like that, Scott. I'm getting my popcorn ready here for the movie rollout. And so you've brought now everyone in the company around this value creation. How do you make sure the economic value is also aligned with what the customer wants?
The process of building a value map is very challenging. There's a technique that we like to call model map match. So the model part is let's model our customer's world. What we're looking at isn't interviewing customers about what products they want. That's way too late in the game. What we want to do is figure out what challenges do individual companies have. that meet certain patterns. Let's find out what's the profile of the human that's most likely to drive that forward. We call that person a change agent. But what do they look like? What's their profile? You know that person isn't going to be successful unless they have an executive sponsor. So if we understand what problems exist and we understand who these types of people are, then the next thing that we can figure out is how do we build the information that they need to figure out why they need to change in the first place and why now. If you don't have those things figured out, we put the burden on salespeople to figure it out, and that's really, really hard to do. When you have that information then, Katja, it becomes pretty simple to figure out whether your value proposition matches those predictable conditions. And then you have a scorecard, and then you keep the validation from it by how well it's testing in the field and how well it's resonating. But you can always tweak it by bringing customers in to talk and react to it. So there's always ways to keep it fresh. I think the challenge is just having the discipline to build it outside in from the get-go.
I love that, Scott. Thank you. And as always, we will finish our podcast with some rapid-fire questions. First one, what's your go-to book?
Well, I wish I had one go-to book. There are 3 books that I've read and I keep reading over and over and over again. One is The Chaos Imperative, which is about embracing disruption and turning it into innovation. Another one is Anti-Fragile, which is about turning disorder into a strategy. And then also the third one is Switch, which is about how change actually happens and how you have to plot it out and how you can manufacture it and create an environment for change rather than putting on the backs of individual people.
Hey, Scott, what's your biggest pet peeve?
My biggest pet peeve is for people who say salespeople should do X, Y, and Z that haven't done it themselves.
And what's one piece of advice you would give someone starting out in sales?
It's easy. Be curious. It's not about you. It's about the customer. Be curious. Find out everything there is to know, what they think, find ways to be relatable with them. That's the easiest path to being successful.
What was one thing you learned about yourself during the pandemic?
What I learned about myself during the pandemic is that going back to your roots of what you know and finding ways to challenge certain questions. So doubling down on being more curious. What I did is kind of threw out my old playbook. I just threw it out and I decided I need to build one from scratch. And I'm so grateful I did because a lot of the things in my old playbook just won't work today. And I don't think it's coming back to where it was before.
Well, thanks for being with us today, Scott.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Growth Hacks. You can follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen. To learn more about us and TCV's CEO and Founder podcast, go to tcv.com or email us at growthhacks@tcv.com.